I should have known that pretending Monday didn't exist was never going to work. The second I stepped into the office that morning, everything felt different. Not visibly, not obviously, but different. The lobby smelled the same, overpriced citrus cleaner and burnt espresso. The receptionist smiled the same polite smile. My security badge beeped the same way when I tapped in. But my pulse was louder, because somewhere upstairs, in a glass-walled corner office, was Griffin Hale. And now I knew something about him. Or maybe the more dangerous truth was, he knew something about me. I told myself to act normal, which immediately made me hyper-aware of everything. Was I walking weird? Was I breathing too loud? Did I look like someone who had shared tequila sodas with his boss under neon lights while discussing compartmentalized identities? Morning, Elliot. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Sasha from Analytics gave me a strange look as she passed my desk. Morning, I replied, hoping my voice didn't sound like it had just cracked under pressure. I sat down, opened my laptop, and focused on emails. If I kept my head down, if I just worked, if I treated today like every other Monday, my screen lit up with a calendar notification. 10 a.m. strategy sync, Hale E. Right? Of course. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. The universe had jokes. The meeting wasn't unusual. Griffin and I met once a week to go over campaign progress. Normally, I prepared obsessively bullet points, backup slides, contingency answers for questions he might ask. Today, my brain was replaying the way he'd said my name at the bar. Off the clock. By 9:58, I was standing outside his office. The glass walls felt more transparent than usual. He was already inside, jacket off, sleeves rolled, reading something on his tablet. Composed, untouchable. Corporate Griffin had returned. I knocked lightly. He looked up. For half a second, just a fraction, something flickered across his face. Recognition layered with memory. Then it smoothed into professionalism. Elliot, he said evenly. Come in. His voice was steady, controlled. No trace of purple lights or tequila or the warmth in his eyes from Friday night. I stepped inside and closed the door. And suddenly it felt like the smallest room in the building. Morning, I managed. Good weekend? He asked. The question was neutral. But it wasn't. I held his gaze. Eventful. One corner of his mouth twitched. Productive, I hope. Very, I replied. A beat. There it was again, that quiet awareness threading through the air between us. Not inappropriate, not obvious, but there. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Let's review the Morrison pitch. Work mode. Safe territory. I launched into the presentation, grateful for something concrete to hold on to. Metrics. Audience breakdown. Budget allocation. Numbers didn't flirt. Slides didn't remember eye contact in dark hallways. Griffin listened the way he always did, focused, analytical, occasionally interjecting with questions that cut straight to the core of an idea. But something had shifted. He wasn't just evaluating the work. He was watching me, not in a predatory way, in a curious way, like he was recalibrating. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. This is strong, he said. Your positioning angle is sharper than last week. Relief loosened something in my chest. Thank you. I mean that, he added. Our eyes held a second longer than necessary. Then, a knock at the door. We both straightened instinctively. Sasha poked her head in. Sorry, Griffin. Quick question about the Q3 projections? Of course, he said smoothly. And just like that, the moment dissolved. I gathered my tablet, standing. I'll send the revised deck by end of day. Elliot, Griffin said before I could reach the door. I paused. Sasha was still there. Office reality had snapped back into place. Yes. His expression was unreadable. Close the door on your way out. Professional. Neutral. But the weight in his tone settled low in my stomach. I nodded and stepped into the hallway. The glass door clicked shut behind me. All morning I felt it. His awareness, like a current running just beneath the surface. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned, then opened the message. GH. I believe we forgot to discuss one agenda item Friday night. My heart thudded. I glanced toward his office through the glass wall. He wasn't looking at me, but his phone was in his hand. I typed back before I could overthink it. Elliot, I don't remember approving after-hours agenda items. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. JH, off the record. My throat went dry. I stared at the message for a full 5 seconds. Then, Elliot, that sounds dangerously close to poor boundary management. Sir. There was a longer pause this time, long enough for me to question every life choice that led to that text. Then my phone buzzed again. JH, careful, Elliot. You're assuming I'm the one at risk of crossing a line. Heat rushed straight down my spine. I swallowed. Across the office, he finally looked up. Not at the room. At me. No smile. No smirk. Just that steady, assessing gaze. And for the first time since Friday night, I realized something that made my pulse spike even harder. He wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't pretending it hadn't happened. He was choosing to acknowledge it. Carefully. Strategically. Like everything else he did. My phone buzzed again. JH, lunch. 1:30. Conference room B. Neutral territory. Neutral territory. Right. I typed back before my nerve could disappear. Elliot. Are we discussing Morrison or agenda items? This time, when I looked up, he was smiling. Subtle. Dangerous. JH. That depends on how brave you're feeling today. And just like that, I knew. Friday night hadn't been a fluke. It had been a beginning. I showed up to conference room B at 1:28. Not because I was eager, because I refused to be late when tension is involved. The room was smaller than Griffin's office, frosted glass walls. Long table, neutral gray chairs. It always felt like the place where uncomfortable conversations happened. Budget cuts. Strategy pivots. Damage control. Appropriate. He was already inside. Of course he was. Jacket back on. Laptop closed. Phone face down on the table. Waiting. The second the door shut behind me, the air shifted. Not inappropriate. Just honest. Relax, he said mildly, noticing my posture. I am relaxed. You're standing like you're defending a thesis. I exhaled and sat across from him. Old habits. His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. I don't want this to be uncomfortable, he said, which was ironic, because it was already the opposite of comfortable. It doesn't have to be, I replied carefully. He nodded once. Good. A beat of silence stretched between us, not empty, but loaded. Then he leaned back slightly. I meant what I said Friday, he continued, about compartmentalizing. I studied his expression. You don't let work and personal life mix. Correct. But you also walked across a crowded club to talk to your employee. The faintest shift in his jaw. Yes. I waited. He didn't look away. That wasn't impulsive, he said finally. I considered ignoring you. I raised an eyebrow. I'm honored I made it to the pros and cons list. One corner of his mouth moved. You did. Something about that tightened my chest. He wasn't flirting for fun. He was calculating. Careful. I'm not reckless, Elliot, he continued. Especially not with my career. Or with people who report to me. There it was. The boundary. Clear. Direct. I nodded slowly. Understood. But I didn't stand. And neither did he. Because the thing neither of us was saying sat right in the middle of the table between us. You came over anyway. You asked if anyone at work knew, I said quietly. His expression sharpened slightly. No. And do you want them to? No. The answer was immediate. Honest. Not ashamed. Strategic. I let that settle. Then this isn't just about HR, I said. His gaze flicked to mine. No, he admitted. There was something different in him now, not boss, not executive. Just a man who had decided to say something real. When you're in leadership, he said slowly, you become a symbol whether you want to or not. Stability, predictability, control. And being openly gay threatens that? In certain rooms, he said calmly. Yes. I hated that he was probably right. Corporate inclusion was glossy in brochures, less so in board meetings. So what are we doing right now? I asked. He didn't answer immediately, and that pause told me everything. I don't know yet, he said finally. Honest again. That did something to me. Because Griffin Hale did not operate in I don't know. And you? He asked. The question landed heavier than I expected. What about me? You're not NAPEVE, he said. You understand the implications. Of course I did. Office rumors moved faster than data reports. And power dynamics weren't just theoretical, they were real. I wouldn't jeopardize my job, I said evenly. And I wouldn't jeopardize mine. Another pause. Charged. Measured. So, I said carefully, this is the part where we decide whether Friday was situational. His eyes darkened slightly. Was it? The way he asked it wasn't teasing. It was deliberate. My pulse picked up. No, I admitted. The word hung there between us. Steady. True. He exhaled slowly, almost like he'd been waiting for that. Good, he said quietly. The single word sent heat straight down my spine. Then he leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. Let's be clear, he continued. If anything happens, anything, it will not impact your role here. You will never receive preferential treatment. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, this stops. I blinked. That wasn't what I expected. He wasn't positioning himself as powerful. He was leveling the field. I appreciate that, I said softly. I need you to understand, he added, voice lower now, that I respect you, professionally first. The way he said first made my stomach flip. And second, I asked before I could stop myself. His gaze held mine. Second, he said, I've noticed you for a while. The room felt smaller, hotter. Not just Friday, he clarified, and suddenly memories rearranged themselves. The longer eye contact in meetings, the subtle praise that lingered, the way he sometimes lingered near my desk after others walked away. You can't say things like that in conference room B, I muttered. A low, almost surprised laugh left him. That's the most honest thing you've said all day. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. This is insane. It's controlled, he corrected. That's worse. His eyes softened slightly. I'm not asking you for anything reckless. Then what are you asking? He studied me for a long second. Dinner, he said. Not a command. Not a smirk. Just a statement. Not as your boss, he added. Outside the office. Public place. Clear lines. My heart was pounding so hard I was certain he could hear it. You realize this is the opposite of compartmentalized, I said. No, he replied calmly. It's intentional. That word again. Strategic. Measured. Safe. But nothing about the way he was looking at me felt safe. Felt inevitable. And if I say no? I asked. His expression didn't change. Then we returned to Friday being a coincidence. Clean exit. No retaliation. No weirdness. Just professionalism. God, he really was like this in every part of his life. I studied him across the table. The man who commanded boardrooms. The man who stood under purple lights with a softer smile. The man who just asked me to dinner like it was both the simplest and most complicated thing in the world. You don't make impulsive decisions, I said. No. So you've thought about this? Yes. How long? Another pause. Then, long enough. That did it. The honesty, the lack of games. The fact that he wasn't pretending this was just chemistry. He had considered it, measured it, and still asked. I stood slowly, walked toward the door. His eyes tracked me the entire time. I reached for the handle, paused, then looked back at him. Friday, I said carefully. You said we could pretend Monday didn't happen. Yes. I opened the door halfway. Tonight, I added. We're off the clock. His jaw tightened just slightly. Elliot, text me the details. I finished. And then I stepped out before my courage could evaporate. As I walked back to my desk, my hands were shaking. Not because I was scared, because something had shifted. Not reckless, not messy, deliberate. And for the first time since I'd started working here, I wasn't just trying to impress Griffin Hale. I was choosing him. I changed shirts 3 times, which is embarrassing, because it was just dinner. Not a date, not officially. Just 2 consenting adults meeting outside office parameters in a neutral environment with clearly stated boundaries. Right? I stared at myself in the mirror and immediately rolled my eyes. "You're 26, I muttered. "Act like it." My phone buzzed. 7:30. Arden Bistro. Under your name. Under my name. Of course it was. Strategic. If anyone from work happened to see the reservation, it wouldn't be his. God, he thought of everything. I grabbed my jacket and headed out before I could second-guess myself. Arden Bistro was dim but not intimate. Busy enough to feel anonymous. Quiet enough to talk. Neutral territory. He was already there. Again. Standing near the host stand, hands in his pockets. No suit jacket this time. Dark sweater. Dark jeans. Relaxed. Less CEO. More man. When he saw me, something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Not calculation. Approval. Which, annoyingly, made my chest tighten. "Elliot," he said. "Griffin." We both paused. And then, he smiled. Not corporate. Not careful. Just warm. "You look good," he said. Simple. Direct. I swallowed. "So do you." The host led us to a table near the back. Candlelight flickered low between us. For a second, it was almost absurd. This was the same man who dissected quarterly reports with surgical precision. Now he was pulling out my chair. "You're staring," he said lightly once we sat. "I'm recalibrating." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "And you're different." "How?" "Not defensive. Genuinely curious." "You're not guarded." He considered that. "I don't need to be here." That answer hit harder than I expected. "You don't." "No." He folded his hands loosely on the table. "I chose to ask you to dinner. I chose to show up. That removes the need for armor." I leaned back slightly. "That's a dangerous thing to say." "Why?" "Because now I know you want to be here." His gaze held mine. "I do." There was no power dynamic in that moment. No hierarchy. Just intention. The waiter interrupted to take our orders, and the break in eye contact almost felt like surfacing for air. When we were alone again, the tension returned, softer now, but deeper. "Tell me something," he said. About you. Something I don't already know from performance reviews." I huffed a quiet laugh. "You read those closely?" "I read everything closely." Of course he did. I thought for a second. "I almost didn't take this job." His expression shifted slightly. "Why?" "I had another offer. Smaller agency. Less pressure. But this place scared me." "And that made you choose it?" "Yes." A faint smile touched his mouth. "That tracks." "What does?" "You don't avoid pressure," he said. "You rise to it." The way he said it felt less like observation and more like recognition. "And you?" I asked. "Why marketing?" He leaned back slightly, considering. "My father was in finance. Very traditional. Very structured. I could almost picture it. Marketing felt flexible. Strategic. But creative. And being openly gay didn't feel flexible." His jaw tightened just slightly. "No." There it was again. Not shame, but history. "Was it bad?" I asked quietly. "At home," he clarified. I nodded. A small pause. "It was managed." That word again. Managed. Meaning it wasn't celebrated. But it wasn't disowned either. Conditional tolerance. I understood that more than I wanted to. "And work," I pressed. "Work rewards predictability. And you're predictable. In most things." The way he said that made heat rise in my chest. "In most," I echoed. His eyes darkened slightly. "I didn't plan on meeting you under purple lights." I smiled despite myself. "You're really stuck on the lighting." It changed the context. It revealed something, I said. Yes. A beat. And what did it reveal? I asked. He didn't look away. That I'm tired of splitting myself in half. The honesty in that knocked something loose in me. This doesn't fix that, I said gently. No, he agreed. But it's a start. The food arrived, grounding us briefly in something normal. We talked about safe things at first. Travel, books, the worst client presentations we'd survived. I meant what I said earlier, he said quietly. About respect. I know. If this becomes complicated, it already is. A faint exhale of amusement left him. Yes, but I mean structurally complicated. You'll end it. It wasn't an accusation, just logic. He studied me carefully. If it threatens your career, he corrected. Something in my chest eased at that. And if it threatens yours? I asked. He didn't hesitate. I can handle my career. The confidence wasn't arrogance. It was fact. We finished dinner slowly, neither of us rushing, neither of us pretending this was casual. When the check came, he reached for it. I stopped him. You asked me, I said. Yes. And you're my boss. Not here. I held his gaze. A small challenge. After a second, he let his hand fall back. Paid. And the look in his eyes when I handed the card over? It wasn't irritation. It was approval. Outside, the air was cold, sharp, real. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, neither quite stepping away. This is the part where we establish next steps, he said lightly. Of course it is. No favoritism. Obviously. And no ambiguity. I raised an eyebrow. Define that. If I want to see you, he said quietly, I will ask. My pulse jumped. And if I say no, I'll accept it. The simplicity of that nearly undid me. And tonight? I asked. His eyes moved over my face. Not invasive, just thorough. Tonight, he said, voice lower now. I'd like to walk you home. The city noise hummed around us. People passed. Cars moved. But the space between us felt suspended. That sounds dangerously like a date, I said. It is. No hesitation. No hedging. Just truth. And something inside me, something that had been cautious and analytical and hyper-aware of consequences, finally went quiet. Okay, the walk to my apartment wasn't long, which was unfortunate, because the longer we walked, the more natural it felt. That was the dangerous part. Not the tension, not the attraction, the ease. We kept a polite distance at first, half a step between us, hands in our own pockets. The city buzzed around us, Friday night energy spilling out of bars and restaurants. Do you always overthink things this much? He asked casually. Yes. A small huff of laughter escaped him. I've noticed. Of course you have. He glanced at me. You analyze rooms before you enter them. That's survival. That's strategy. Same thing, I replied. He didn't argue. We reached a crosswalk and stopped. The light turned red, casting everything in a muted glow. He looked different out here. Less sharp angles. More depth. You're quiet, he said. I'm recalculating. Again. Yes. About what? I exhaled slowly. About what happens if this goes wrong. He didn't deflect that. Fair, he said. And pressed. And I think we're both careful enough that it won't. The light changed. We crossed. That's confidence, I said. That's assessment. God, he really was like this in every environment. When we reached my building, I slowed instinctively. There it was. The line. The natural end of a first date. We stopped just outside the entrance. Streetlight above us. Cold air. Muted traffic. This is me, I said unnecessarily. He nodded once. Silence settled. Not awkward. Just waited. I had a good time, he said. Not charming. Not rehearsed. Just direct. So did I. Another beat. I meant what I said, he added quietly. No ambiguity, right? So I'm going to ask you something clearly. My pulse jumped. Okay. His eyes held mine steadily. May I kiss you? No games. No assumption. Just permission. The fact that he asked did more to me than if he'd just done it. Yes, I said. Cars still passed. Someone laughed across the street. But the center of gravity shifted. Because this wasn't fantasy. This was real. When he pulled back, it wasn't abrupt. Just enough to look at me. "You're thinking again," he murmured. "Shut up." A quiet laugh escaped him. "I've wanted to do that for a while." My stomach flipped. "How long is a while?" His jaw flexed slightly. "Since you argued with me in the Henderson meeting." I blinked. "That was 6 months ago." "Yes." "You're telling me you've been." "Yes." The simplicity of it hit harder than anything else tonight. "You hid that well. I don't mix impulse with leadership. But you're mixing something now." His eyes darkened just slightly. "Yes." The air between us shifted again. Softer, warmer, more dangerous. "Come upstairs," I said before I could overanalyze it. The words hung there. He didn't move immediately. Instead, he studied my face. "This is where I confirm," he said quietly, "that you're not feeling pressured. I'm not. Not because I'm your boss. No. Not because this feels intense. It feels intentional." Something in his expression softened at that. "Okay," he said. We stepped inside together. The elevator ride was different. The doors opened on my floor. We walked down the hallway. I unlocked my door. And suddenly my apartment, which had always felt comfortably mine, felt exposed. Personal. He stepped inside slowly, glancing around. "It's exactly how I pictured," he said. "Neurotic but organized?" "Intentional," he corrected. I closed the door behind us, and the click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. We stood there for a second, facing each other. No office, no public street, no neutral ground. Just us. "You're still evaluating," he said softly. "Of course I am." I stepped back first, giving him space to move further inside. He slipped off his shoes neatly by the door without being asked. Of course he did. "You want a drink?" I asked, mostly to steady my own pulse. "Water's fine." I disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, gripping the counter while my heartbeat tried to recalibrate. This was real. Not club lighting. Not candlelight. Not sidewalk tension. My apartment. My choice. When I came back, he was standing near the bookshelf, scanning the titles. "You alphabetized," he said without turning around. I said, "Don't judge me." "I'm not judging," he replied calmly. "I'm impressed." I handed him the glass. "You don't have to perform calm for me," he said quietly. "I'm not performing. You are." That almost made me laugh. "Occupational hazard," I said. His gaze softened slightly. "You're safe here, Elliot." That did something to me, because he wasn't talking about my apartment. Morning light filtered through the curtains, turning everything quiet and pale. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle. Without the structure of his usual composure, he looked younger somehow, less defined by expectation. A faint crease between his brows remained, like even sleep couldn't fully erase the weight he carried. I wondered when the last time was that someone saw him like this, unobserved, unperforming. My movement must have shifted something, because his hand tightened slightly before his eyes opened. There was a brief second of disorientation, then recognition, then something softer. "Morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Morning." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't awkward. It felt like the kind of quiet that only exists after something meaningful happens. "You're staring," he said, eyes still half-lidded. "You look different." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I hope that's not negative feedback." "It's not." He shifted onto his back, staring up at the ceiling. Another pause. "Do you regret this?" he asked. Direct. Of course. I didn't hesitate. "No." He exhaled slowly, not dramatic, but noticeable. "Good," he said. I turned onto my side, propping my head on my hand. "You?" His eyes flicked to mine. "No." That answer carried weight. Not relief. Certainty. The room filled with quiet again. Morning sounds filtering in from outside, distant traffic, someone walking a dog, the low hum of a city waking up, reality approaching. So, I said lightly, this is the part where we figure out how to exist in daylight. A quiet huff of amusement left him. Yes. He rubbed a hand over his face, thinking. Nothing changes professionally, he said. I know. But personally, he added, glancing at me again, something did. It wasn't romanticized, just factual. And somehow that made it more meaningful. I'm not expecting declarations, I said. His eyebrow lifted slightly. That's good, because I don't make them impulsively. I smiled. I gathered. A beat. But, he continued, voice quieter now, I would like to see where this goes. There it was. Not a promise. Not a plan. An intention. That sounds reasonable, I replied. Reasonable isn't usually how people describe this kind of situation. Most people aren't us. That earned a real smile. The kind that lingered. We eventually got up, slow, unhurried movements that felt almost domestic in a way neither of us acknowledged out loud. Coffee brewed. Windows opened, and the strangest part was how normal it felt. He stood in my kitchen, sleeves pushed up, sipping coffee while scanning the skyline like this was simply another version of his life. Maybe it was. Maybe the compartment wasn't breaking. Maybe it was expanding. You're quiet again, he said. I'm thinking about Monday. His mouth twitched slightly. That feels inevitable. It does. A pause. Are you worried? He asked. I considered it honestly. A little. He nodded once. That's appropriate. You? Yes. That surprised me. You get worried? I assess risk, he corrected. I laughed. Of course. But then his expression softened. This isn't a risk I dismiss. The honesty in that lingered. We stood there in the quiet for a moment, coffee cups in hand, morning light spilling across the floor, and the weight of what we'd started settled gently rather than heavily. Not overwhelming, just real. Eventually, he set his cup down. I should go, he said. It wasn't abrupt, just acknowledgement. I walked him to the door, and suddenly it felt familiar, like we'd done this before. We hadn't, but it felt like we would again. He paused at the threshold, looking at me in that steady way that always felt like being fully seen. Dinner again, he said. Soon. Not a question, but not a command either. Text me, I replied. A small smile. I will. I'm glad it was you, he said quietly. And before I could overanalyze that sentence into oblivion, he stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there for a moment, apartment quiet again, coffee cooling on the counter, sunlight fully awake now, and the realization settled slowly, like something unfolding instead of crashing. Nothing had exploded, nothing had fallen apart, but something had begun. And Monday, for the first time since I'd started this job, wasn't something I was bracing for. It was something I was curious about, because somewhere between purple lights, conference rooms, dinner tables, and quiet mornings, Griffin Hale had stopped being just my boss and started becoming something far more complicated, something intentional, something unfinished, something that was only just beginning.